Manchester's housing problems, but in particular tackling the number of people sleeping rough on the streets, the number of homeless people in this city.
Sure.
Now, if you look at the latest report from the respected housing charity Shelter, they say that the numbers sleeping rough have gone up in the last year, that Manchester's rate of homelessness is far worse than the national average, and that, as they put it, it's the most problematic city in the northwest of England. So you've failed.
Well, no, I don't accept that. Obviously, when you are a successful city, that brings extra pressures and extra challenges. But no, the commitment I made was on rough sleeping. And on rough sleeping, we do a count every month. We are holding the numbers in the high double figures, and that position has been maintained through the cost of living crisis. To be honest, we thought the numbers would go up, but they haven't. And the reason why they haven't is because as mayor, I came in and I said I wanted to offer everybody forced to sleep rough the chance of a bed every night. So we have that scheme in place. It supports around 600 people every night in our city region. And the point is this, I can't stop people going onto the street because those are circumstances beyond my control. But what I can look you in the eye and say is everybody who does go on the street, currently we can offer them accommodation on the same day. And I believe that honours the commitment that I made. Obviously, the bigger question of homelessness and housing shortage is something, again, that I don't have the full means to deliver. But on rough sleeping, we've made a real difference.
That phrase you've just used, I don't have the full means to deliver, it's a very interesting phrase. Does that apply too to your promises to clean up Manchester's air? Because if we look at Manchester today, again, its record over the last 6 years is poor, and the scheme that was supposed to be put in place this year, a clean air zone, has basically been suspended.
Well, it's because the pandemic changed things. So we were required by the government to put in place a scheme to clean up the air across our 10 boroughs, because all 10 boroughs received a legal direction to act from the government, and we worked with the government in good faith. But what we found was, through the pandemic, the cost of vehicles shot up, the order books became full, so people couldn't buy vehicles. And what we would not do here is hit people with a tax that they couldn't avoid. So we went back to the government and said, look, this scheme can't proceed now because the world has changed post-pandemic. And we're currently in that position where the scheme is under review.
You're in a crazy position where you've got signs across Manchester telling people that there's going to be a clean air zone and that they need to be aware if they're driving a commercial vehicle of a certain age, they're going to get a charge. And those signs are now completely redundant because the scheme isn't happening. You're the mayor, you have these excuses, but the people of Manchester are going to think, this guy, he's failed.
They're not excuses, to be honest. I mean, we were required to take measures to clean up the air and have a clean air zone. But we went back and said, we can't do this without punishing people who are already struggling in a cost of living crisis. So it's my job to stand up for the people of Greater Manchester. And I did that in going back to the government and say, look, not now. And actually, we think the right way to net zero is not to kind of hit people with a big stick and hit them with taxes that they can't avoid. The best way to do it is to do it via incentives, support people who want to make the change, I think more broadly, there's a big point there. If, as a UK or as a world community, we try and kind of punish people to net zero with taxes or say, no, you can't do that thing you like doing anymore, then I think we may not get the level of pace in this journey that we need.
Right, but
I think we need an incentives-based approach, and that's what we're trying to do here.
It depends how you look at a problem like environmental cleanup. Isn't the biggest punishment of all for the people of Manchester that they're still breathing in unacceptably polluted, dirty air?
But you're implying that we're doing nothing, and that's not true. You know, we are undertaking in Greater Manchester, we are months away from the start of it now, the biggest transformation of public transport in England outside of London in 3 decades. So we are, well, I have already taken the decision. I'm the first mayor in England outside of London to take the decision to put buses back under public control. And as it stands today, I am purchasing electric buses in large numbers because they will come in to a reform system that starts in this September called the B network. And my officials tell me the buses in our 10 boroughs are the biggest cause of polluted air, and those buses will be changing dramatically later this year.
Are you these days seeing yourself as much more the mayor of Manchester, committed and driven by that sense of commitment to place, than you see yourself as Andy Burnham, the senior Labour Party politician? In other words, is political partisan politics less important to you now, and this commitment to Manchester fundamentally what drives you?
That's perceptive, absolutely. That's the way I do see myself. When I kind of came to the end of my 16-year journey in Westminster, I tried to advocate for the north of England within that system, and perhaps people may remember, some people may remember, that alongside others, I worked to have the truth told about the Hillsborough disaster. The very fact that an entire English city was crying injustice for 20 years tells it, and nobody in Whitehall, as far as I could tell, was listening, tells you that the north doesn't get heard in the same way in the Westminster system as other parts of the country.
Because it's interesting to me that while you've been in power in Manchester, the Conservative Party, the enemy as far as you're concerned in terms of your partisan political colours, the Conservative Party has made commitments to levelling up, to the Northern Powerhouse political programme, as they call it. And there are people like Michael Gove in government who, you have said, makes important things happen. When Michael actually uses his power to try to get things done, it is a pleasure to work with him.
Correct.
So you're now giving this Conservative government quite a lot of credit.
I will always give credit where it's due. You know, when I left Westminster, I took a sort of vow, actually, that I would not just play the usual point-scoring game. I said publicly that where the government gets it right, I will say so. But where they don't, I will call them out with all of my political sort of experience and knowledge. And I did that during the pandemic when they tried to treat Greater Manchester citizens as second-class citizens. I would never stand for that, and I called them out as loudly as I could. But no, where they get it right, I will do that. I learned in my time in Westminster, and I talked about that experience of working on Hillsborough. When I reached across the House and worked with Theresa May, that's when progress gets made. And you know, my experience in politics has shown me that. So you know, when I came into this role, I decided it was time to do something different. There was no point repeating the point scoring of Westminster through these new devolved structures. So I decided to take a place first rather than a party first approach. And when you speak with a place first perspective, I think you can get more authority, I guess, in what you're saying, because you're speaking for everybody here, the way the vast majority of people here feel, however they vote. And I'm conscious that the two elections that I've stood to be mayor of Greater Manchester, people beyond my own party have given me their support. So I'm ever conscious of that when I speak for this city region. But I think that gives the voice more, if you like, more authority because of that place first approach.
Well, what you did say earlier this year, which was interesting in terms of this debate about partisanship and how it works, is earlier this year you said, I don't think any of the parties, you meant the two main parties, I guess, Labour and Conservative, I don't think either of them are cutting through to the extent that is needed to give true voice to the feelings that people have at the moment. Now, you said that earlier this year. Do you still think that's true? I.e., do you still think that your party, the Labour Party, isn't truly cutting through and giving voice to the feelings of the people of the Northwest, for example?
I think it was a reflection of where we were last year and the kind of part of the cycle that we're in, the midterm cycle. Always oppositions will say more and more the closer that we get to a general election.
But would you accept that in politics, what you need, particularly as an opposition party after the enemy has been in power for a number of years, what you need is a galvanizing idea. Do you think the Labour Party today has that big galvanizing idea?
Yes, I do.
Well, what is it?
And I'll come on to it. But I also believe that people are going back to Labour. I mean, the polls show that. People are ready to, well, people want change, I think. The next election is going to be a change election. And I think the galvanizing idea is around more devolution. That's been a very...
Really?
It's
That's
been
the galvanizing idea?
more power for people and places to improve the things that they care about. I think that is a galvanizing idea. I think there is a lot of unhappiness, and we saw this through the Brexit referendum. That, I think, revealed a kind of sense of alienation, neglect in large parts of the country. I think the idea of giving more places and the people who live in those places more power to change things, I think can be a galvanizing idea. I don't think you can run the world top down in the way it used to be run. That was a very 20th century idea. I think in the 21st century, it's cities like this one that we're sitting in now that are leading the way, that are kind of bringing forward the new ideas, the new thinking. And the more you empower these places, the more they will do. And actually, that will mean a resurgent north of England. And people do get excited about that.
I mean, you know American politics quite well. Look at Joe Biden. Joe Biden, a moderate, a centrist Democrat, has committed $400 billion to his inflation reduction program, which essentially is mostly about investment in green technologies. Where's Keir Starmer's equivalent of such a big idea?
Well, you mentioned it. I think the whole drive to a green economy.
Yeah, but it's been delayed.
Yeah, but it's got to be credible, hasn't it? But it's delayed by a couple of years.
Is that a great slogan to put on the next Labour election campaign? We've got a big idea, but by the way, we're not going to do it for a while.
I think it's a balance, isn't it? You've got to have a big idea that's deliverable, and I think that's just the reality of it. But if you think about that issue and what it could mean for the north of England, if you were to really proceed with that change, it could reindustrialise the north of England in a way that brings jobs that will last the rest of this century. Now, that is a very big prize, and it's only the Labour Party that is talking seriously, on a Biden-like scale, if you like, as to how that is actually done. There's other big proposals out there. There's a commitment from the Labour Party to renationalise the railways. Well, that is a very welcome commitment.
Well, that is a pretty big idea, but there was a much bigger idea in the last Labour Party manifesto, which wasn't just to nationalise the rail industry, but to nationalise key utilities as well. Keir Starmer backed that at the time, but he's walked away from it.
The problem being, though, that manifesto, to make my point, had good things, but too many things, and it therefore lacked credibility with some people.
But you still, just to be clear, you still support the idea, do you not, of actually putting back into public ownership key utilities, energy provision as water as well? In
a realistic way, because as I said before, I think we sold off control of the basics in this country. We as I say, we deregulated buses, we privatised trains, energy systems, and people are paying high prices for energy now because there isn't enough public control over prices. Take another example, though. Take another example, water, where, again, privatised without the necessary regulatory control. We have reached a position in Britain today where people can't afford buses, can't afford trains, can't afford energy, and we see raw sewage pumped into our rivers and in our seas. And tell me that that's a good place to have ended up. We need more public ownership and more public control of essentials.
You were a Remainer, Keir Starmer was a Remainer, but Keir Starmer in recent months has made it plain that he is not interested in reopening not just a debate about whether Britain should one day go back into the EU, but he's not even interested in opening up a debate about whether Britain should try to get a deal, a bit like Norway or Switzerland, where it's in an economic area with the EU, where it joins the customs union, the single market. He doesn't want to discuss any of that. Do you think that's a mistake?
I'm not sure it's quite fair, though, if I'm honest, because I think there definitely has been a signalling of a different, less kind of saber-rattling tone.
Well, forgive me, but I'm going to give you a quote from Starmer. Britain's future is outside the EU. It is not in the single market. It is not in the customs union. It is not with a return to freedom of movement. All of those arguments are in the past, where they belong.
Well, I think absolutely. We cannot keep rerunning this debate and ignore some of the other issues that need to be addressed. If Britain does get into that position where we are just constantly debating, then we're not going to move forward. But you mentioned those things. I don't think you can leap back to those things. They have been settled in this period that we're in, but you can have a different relationship with Europe than the one that we've seen in recent times, where it's all about kind of positioning against the French and kind of challenging the Irish government. Unhelpful rhetoric when you sit in a position like I do, where we want good relationships with Ireland, a place that has strong bonds with the northwest of England, or we do want to work with our colleagues in Germany as we do. I think we've got to move beyond that phase that we've been in, where there's just this sort of pointless posturing in Europe, and get to a more practical space where we're getting arrangements that work better for people.
Let's just talk, before we end, about the way the Labour Party works, because you're now looking at it from Manchester, not from Westminster. But what we see in London and in Starmer's party headquarters is an obsession with discipline. Jeremy Corbyn, for example, the left of the Labour Party, the leader who, as you just said, in 2019 led Labour to a very significant defeat. He's been told he can't fight his constituency. And people who support him in the party are, it seems, being either rooted out or being told they can't stand for significant position. Do you worry about a witch hunt being led by Starmer and his loyalists?
I worry that things become too factional between both left and right of the party. And I've often felt in my political career that I've lived in the middle of those two groups. I kind of came into politics as somebody who was kind of just, if you like, loyal Labour sort of background, and arrived in Parliament and was a little surprised at times at the kind of ferocity of the sort of toing and froing between, if you like, factions on both sides of the party. And I think the risk in this moment is that the party becomes trapped in that kind of situation and misses people in the middle who want to focus on what it is we need to do to answer the concerns that people here in Greater Manchester and beyond have. So I think the focus needs to kind of stop being internal. It needs to be relentlessly external, and it needs to be about, all sides of the Labour movement starting to pull in the same direction towards, hopefully, a Labour victory in 2024.
Do you think there's a degree of insecurity in the leader's office right now? Not so long ago, you appeared to be blaming unelected people in their 20s and 30s around Keir Starmer who think they know it all and think they're the bee's knees. It would be nice, you said, to have some support up here in Manchester from the national office.
Well, I think what happens is, because I've been there is an anonymous kind of briefing culture in Westminster that is actually one of the most unattractive things about it.
Have you been briefed against?
Yeah, recently, yes. And
why
I noticed
why do you think
that
they
other
do
members
that?
of the shadow cabinet, and I'm not going to be
Why do you think they do that in Starmer's
Well, I
office?
was just about to say, I'm not going to be so sort of, kind of po-faced to say it didn't happen in the past. It did happen in the Brown government, in the Blair government. It happens, but it's not attractive because, particularly where you've got elected politicians out trying to do a job. I made the point that